Justices,
Mr.
if I may proceed.
Certainly.
Justices, I'm appearing for SPOC, the Society for the Protection of Constitution. And Mr. Slabbert and I are appearing pro bono. We're not seeking any cost against anyone, and we're also not seeking any cost order. We do so as amicus. We take our brief seriously to act in the interest of the court and to assist the court. We do not necessarily align ourselves to any of the arguments presented before us. So we will give our independent, as far as possible, views relating to this case. Now, what Mr. du Plessis has argued yesterday, and that's one thing that we agree with him. We say that it's a simple case. He said the judgment can be confined to 1 page. We say it should be confined to 4 pages. Now, and we'll tell you why, because there are different topics with respect that the court should consider, and I'm going to allocate the different topics to the different pages. If I then start then with the first question arise about the interpretation of the Constitution. The Constitution is a product of negotiation between the old and the new democratic order. In the Constitution, there are already some give and take situation. Public purpose is now expanding the previous dispensation, and market value is no longer the be and all. We also say that the Constitution is for the people, which was illustrated in 1996 when it came out, that we saw different walks of people walking around with a little booklet with the Constitution picture on it, reading the Constitution. So it's for them also to understand. It's for the people. Now, on page 1 of your judgment, judges, the first issue that arises is the interpretation of section 25 of the Constitution. Now, the interpretation of section 25, and I'm going to open my act there, is a separate consideration which should be decided separately to any other, to the specific act. So in other words, first you will have to refer to the interpretation, and how does one go about in interpreting the Constitution? The Constitution tells you how to go about, because section 39 of the Constitution tells you what you must take into consideration in interpreting section 25. 25 falls within the Bill of Rights, and section 39 deals with it in, say, interpretation of the Bill of Rights. When interpreting the Bill of Rights, a court, tribunal, or forum, A, must promote the values that underlie an open and democratic society based on human dignity, equality, and freedom, must consider international law, and, this is important, may consider foreign law. So that is a discretion. Paragraph 2 of subsection 2, when interpreting any legislation and when developing the common law or customary law, every court, tribunal, or forum must promote the spirit, purport, and objects of the Bill of Rights. So that is the basis where, with respect, you should begin in approaching section 25. Now, if one reads section 25.2 and section 25.3 and section 25.8, those are the sections which I'm going to focus on. There can be no doubt for any reader whatsoever that the content of those specific sections say the following. Paragraph 2, property may be expropriated only in terms of law of general application, A, for a public purpose or in the public interest. That we know, there's no debate about that. Public interest is expanding the previous dispensation. And B, and it has to be read in context, subject to compensation, the amount of which and the time and manner of payment of which had either been agreed or by those affected or decided or approved by a court. Now, if I read the Constitution, and I say that will also be the same if any man on the street reads this Constitution, there's no doubt in our mind that it is subject to compensation. And it's compensation, the word, that's got a specific meaning. Compensation means to recompense. In other words, it's not, usually it's for a loss that was suffered. You recompense someone, and that is the specific word. Reading it in context, it goes on, and it says, the amount of which. Now, amount in this sense, I submit, means a numerical amount. In other words, the compensation, the amount of which, so that is number one upwards. It's not a zero, or it's a null or a no. Of which at the time and manner of payment, that's the third clue that we've got, payment. What does amount mean? I've said what it means. It's a numerical amount. It's not a scientific amount for this purpose. Payment means to pay something to absolve your debt. In other words, to pay something or give something to take away an obligation, of which either have been agreed or decided by the court. So anyone, and if you're confronted with the confrontation of the interpretation in terms of Section 39 of the Constitution, it is clear that is what has happened here is when the old order and the new democratic order agreed about the future of South Africa and the future of the Constitution, that they specifically agreed that compensation will be payable in the event of expropriation. That is cast in stone. We cannot get away from it. Now, this 25.3, I've heard there were some arguments about that as well. 25.3 deals with a mechanism in calculating the compensation. In other words, the amount of the compensation and the time and manner of payment, once again the word payment, strong, must be just and equitable. So the amount must be of compensation and time and manner of payment, reflecting an equitable balance between the public interest, and then it goes on. Paragraphs A to E of Section 25.3 deals with a way of calculating compensation. It does not give the opportunity to say null or zero compensation. If one say null compensation, it is tantamount to saying no compensation or zero compensation. If you say that it's not compensation, it will be a contradiction. But one cannot look at paragraphs 25.3 A to E and try to say that makes it possible for dual compensation. That's not what it does. They say the compensation in terms of Section 25.2 must be calculated in this manner by taking those factors. It is actually an abandonment of the previous dispensation where market value was required. Now you can look at all these factors and technically you can come to R1 because it remains an amount, it remains a compensation, it remains something that you can pay. So that is, but we're not dealing with respect in this case, and it must not be conflated. This case is not today about the calculating of compensation. This case is about the principle whether zero or no compensation can be inserted in a law of general application. So if you take the first page of your judgment and you deal with this with the greatest respect, you cannot come to another conclusion that the Act itself on a proper interpretation does not allow zero compensation. Now, there are other factors in 25 which I haven't heard in court until now, which is very important, or not elaborately, if it was mentioned in passing. Paragraph 23, 25.5, the state must take reasonable legislative and other measures within the available resources to foster conditions which enable citizens to gain access to land on an equitable basis. We don't have a problem. Spock doesn't have a problem with any land reform. And we don't have a problem with 25 because it says reasonable legislative measures must be taken. But those measures doesn't break down, if one reads it in context, the specific obligations to pay compensation payable and amount as per 25, 2 and 3. Then a person or community whose tenure of land is legally insecure as a result of past racially discriminatory laws, either to tenure which is legally secure or to be comparable redress, is entitled to the extent provided. That we also don't have a problem. But then it goes to paragraph 7. It also, that must be the source of the Land Restitution Act. It refers to 1913, and we heard all about that. We don't have a problem with that. But it still doesn't change the effect of section 25, 2 and 3, that compensation needs to be paid. But now we're getting to the interesting one. That is the only one that I think is of significance and importance for this court to consider. It specifically says the following, and I'm going to read it. No provision of this section may impede the state from taking legislative and other measures to achieve land, water, and related reform in order to redress the results of past racially discrimination, provided that any departure from the provisions of this section is in accordance with provisions of section 36(1). Now, if one reads it, this one opens the door for a departure of section 25(2), where compensation is a requirement. It opens the door, but on condition. And there's a jurisdictional fact that, or a key that opens this door, and that is no provision of the section may impede the state from taking legislative and other measures. So the question is, does null compensation, or null, I don't want no compensation is more accurate, does no compensation impede the state from taking legislative and other measures to achieve land? So that's the first jurisdictional question that needs to be asked. Now, this is a factual question. In order to answer this question, one will have to look in all those files behind you, Judge Saldanha, and see whether it has been dealt with. It has not been dealt with. The files consist of arguments between the parties, but very little fact. There are no factual propositions by the state to come and say that this the judge is impeded by no compensation, which is the issue in this court, to take legislative and other measures to achieve land, etc., whether that plays a role. But even if one skips that point, and we say, no, fine, let's accept for a moment, I say there's no facts to substantiate it. It wasn't dealt with in all the papers that were exchanged. We've got boxes full of it. It's not dealt with. There's no exposition about the financial position of the state, or that the state cannot afford. We're not against land reform, but there's no exposition to say the state cannot afford compensation, even that it's a nominal amount, because it's brought down as a result of section 25(3). So in order to redress the so-and-so, then it goes. But this is the important part. And this is where I'm going to focus my argument for page 2 of the judgment. We're going to say from the provisions of this section is in accordance with the provisions of section 36(1). Now 36(1), we submit, plays a pivotal role in the consideration of this case, because We have now seen that the Bill of Rights says that there are property rights. It's subject to compensation, a payment, an amount, and all that. We've seen that. But no right in the Bill of Rights is cast in stone. For that reason, there's Section 36, which can bring in a limitation to a Bill of Rights. Whether it's compared to other rights in terms of the Bill of Rights, or for whatever reason, the Section 36 is the test to say whether there should be a limitation or a departure or a deviation of the rights in the Bill of Rights. And I'm taking you there. So we say that on two bases. Section 36 are important. We say Section 36 is important merely because there's a right in the Bill of Rights, and Section 36 can limit a right in the Bill of Rights. We also say so if one reads it in context, because of the reading of Section 25.8, that Section 36.1 comes into play. In other words, if there's a factual finding that something like the no compensation impedes the legislative or other measures to be taken, etc., if that is the factual finding, still the circle is complete. We have to go to Section 36 to consider that.
Before you go there,
yes.
Sorry, Mr. Straydon.
Yes.
So, according to your argument, we have to then read sub 2 and sub 3 as placing an obligation to keep the outcome, whatever the mathematics is, but keep it at 0 plus something.
I wouldn't put it the way that you're saying it, dear Zera. It always has to be an amount.
It always has to be plus.
Yeah,
but greater than 0.
0, no. Amount, yes. To just put it differently, but I think we're on the same.
Yes, I'm deliberately putting it this way because I want you to explain to me why.
Because thank you.
Why is that not? I want you to explain whether or not that is placing an additional requirement to these requirements, to what is set out here. In other words, where do you get the plus? What plus? Is it what 0 plus?
I'm not getting 0 plus. I'm saying it's only, what I'm saying is, if one reads that, and if one asks anyone on the street to read it, they will say that if you expropriate, the expropriation is subject to compensation.
Yes, sorry, what I'm trying to get from you, in terms of sub 3, one must conduct an exercise, not so, you called it the mechanism, the calculation mechanism. And now, let's say the administrator arrives at 0.
Yes.
According to your argument, the administrator must up that somehow. And I want to hear why. Because
the Constitution says so.
Where?
The Constitution says that in each case of expropriation, and we can't get beyond it, we can't get by this. The Constitution tells you, if you interpret that, it says Section 25.2, it has to be read together with 3. Subject to compensation. Compensation is compensation for a loss, it's a recompense. In the amount, 0 is not an amount. 0 is nothing. Amount is money to be paid.
So that administrator may not arrive at 0.
It can't arrive at that.
Or they may arrive at 0, but they must up it because of these provisions.
I can't see that he ever is going to arrive at 0, but let's accept for your argument that he's arriving at 0.
It's not my argument.
Or the question, pardon me.
To make it make sense for me, because this is quite important.
Yes, it's the crux of the case.
Yes.
Yes, we agree on that. So the point is, this is being said to say compensation, payment, and amount. So interpreting that, it means that you cannot give no compensation. If you get to an amount of 0 in your private calculations, you cannot give that. Then you can give 10 Rand or 20 Rand or whatever. And it goes hand in hand, and I will show that to you, with the Expropriation Act. Because that is also the offer that needs to be made. There's no offer if you offer 0. And there's also the amount. They're also using the same language as in this section. So You cannot pay nothing. And we're bound to the Constitution whether we like it or not, whether we feel that it's unequitable or not, but that horse has bolted, and we're sitting with it now. And that was bolted at the decision-taking stage when they've accepted this Constitution. But I'm glad that you're asking that question. I don't know how is he going to calculate to get zero, but I'll get to that because I'm going to say that's even impossible. Because there are so many factors in land involved. We're talking about, but I'll get to that. But let's deal with this aspect first. So what you are asked to do is to take the Constitution and take Section 39 and give an interpretation. And if I'm wrong, you decide that amount can be zero, then you decide that. If I'm right, you decide amount and compensation and payment is money to be paid, whatever nominal amount being arrived. We're not going to do the calculations today. It's not being asked of us. We talk about the principles, so we don't have to go into that. But then we go, at the end of the day, what we will have to decide with the greatest respect is to decide whether it can be limited if we apply Section 36, because perhaps one can then decide, okay, fine, we're not, even this is the correct interpretation, whether we can walk away from it and say that, okay, zero compensation is applicable. But I'm going to argue that if we go through the Section 36 test, that you will never allow that to happen. Because if it's 36, that is the next topic. 36 will be a consideration of the new Act, Section 12(3), which is the one, the impugned section. Forget about the categories that the people are talking about. We're talking about the first sentence of Section 12, where it says no compensation, whether that is in line with the Constitution. So that we will focus on. But if you go then the second stage of this argument and start then with a Section 36 consideration. Let us have a look at 36 before we carry on. 36 says the following.
Mr. Strider, my 10 minutes has gone up of uninterrupted.
Oh, I apologize.
No. I just been waiting for my 10 minutes to.
Judge, if we can give you another 10 minutes, I can finish off.
No. I said I'd give you 10 minutes before we interrupt.
Yeah.
So I've been waiting very patiently.
Yeah.
Could we reverse a bit? Because at 36, you only have to deal with 36 if we've dealt with the first page of your judgment.
Correct.
At the first page of the judgment,
Yes.
you've left out a very crucial part in section 35.
25.
25(3). You took us directly from section 25(2) to compensation, and then you said that compensation must be determined on A to E.
Yes.
Huh?
Yes.
Good.
I said so.
But there's more to it.
Yes.
There's more to it. Crucially, there's more to it. And that's what section 25(3) tells us. Because it says that the payment must be just and equitable. You've never mentioned those words yet, even though referring us to the back of all of these files, which must reflect an equitable balance between the competing interest. Now, we don't, so before we get to page 2, let's just stay at page 1. Why have you left that out?
No, what I'm
Because
saying
that's
is,
because that's what everybody else argues,
Yeah.
except the applicants.
Judge, I'm not.
Those are the controlling principles. Those are the controlling principles in the computation of compensation, just
Yes.
and equitable, and it's a balancing exercise. We don't even get to start looking at A, B, C, D, E until we have been able to understand what is the task at hand. So tell us, why have you left those out?
Judge, I've dealt with that, and I'm sticking to what I've dealt with, but I can just explain. What I say is the following. That section must be read in context. We're still at the interpretation of the Constitution. That section tells you the following. We know what compensation means because that was determined in section 25.2 and we've dealt with it. I'm not going to repeat that. We know what payment means, we know what an amount means. Now that payment, the compensation, must now be calculated, but it's done on the basis of a positive amount. In other words, compensation. So if we read it in context, we can't just start to read halfway that specific line. It tells you with the perspective, that's what I say, that those will remain my submissions. It says the amount of the compensation. What compensation? What is compensation? So compensation means a positive amount. There's no such thing as no compensation because that's not compensation. Compensation has a specific meaning in the English language. I heard you earlier tell Mr. Bockstrom about the language, which is important. Now the language is very important because we're working with the Constitution. It says the amount of the compensation and the time and manner of payment. That's physical. We used to say in the insolvency court, pay them with klink in the mint. Payment must be just and equitable. So the amount that has to be paid, but it's going from the premise that there needs to be a payment. That is the premise of this court. So if you want to go and calculate the amount of compensation, the time and manner of payment. Payment is paying an obligation. It's not a zero. That's no payment. I've never seen a payment by zero. Must be just and equitable, reflecting an equitable balance between the public. So the calculation must be just and equitable. This is what this section tells you. It doesn't deal with allowing zero compensation or zero, whatever you want to call it. There's no compensation. It doesn't deal with, it deals with a manner of calculation, and that's where the mistake was made in what I've heard in sitting in the court. This section has got nothing to do with calculating nil compensation.
Who made the mistake?
In arguments or whatever, I don't know what to, I'm not aligned with them. That was the wrong premise to go on to this one. So you must, with the greatest respect, take this section. That will be forming part of the judgment. I think we can fit it in page 1. And we can then, you come to the conclusion to read it. But then the test will be, and I'm not closing the door to a possible deviation or limitation. That is a test in terms of section 36. All sections in the Bill of Rights can be deviated from, but first you have to follow and interpret the specific section. Now we're going to 36, because 36 is a weighing exercise, it's a proportional exercise. Now we're going to see whether the facts before Judge Saldanha, which are contained in those files, whether those facts can tell us what weigh in favor of the state. And we say nothing weighs in favor of the state. So if you go to section 36, Judge.
You wrote in this judgment. You wrote in this judgment.
My sister says, do I have to write a 4-page judgment?
You have to.
I
Okay.
say, I'm doing the 1-page judgment. Mr. Duplessis said I could.
But I'm at 4 pages, but I can put it on a WhatsApp and forward it.
Mr. Duplessis says 1 page, you say 4 pages. Mr. Bockstrom says on a Chappies wrapper. All right.
Yeah, but there are already a printed form on the Chappies wrapper. 36.
Sorry, I just, Mr. Bockstrom.
The rights
the
in the
late
Bill
hour
of
of the day.
Rights may be limited only in terms of the law of general application, to the extent that the limitation is reasonable and justifiable in an open and democratic society. And I'm running the risk of being saying that I did not include, but there are also A to E, what factors should be considered. I don't want to read it and waste time for purposes of the limitation clause. Now, if one goes, despite the clear wording of section 25, and also as a result of the content of 25.8, which I don't concede the impediment portion, if one go and take it further and you come and consider the facts of this case to see whether the deviation or the departure or the limitation, whatever we want to call it, is reasonable and justifiable, one should do so. And I'll try to do that as quickly as possible. There are three factors that the justices should take into consideration. The first factor is the position of the state. The second factor is the position of the owner. And the third one is the society. Before I start with the state, I just want to give a brief background in 2 sentences, perhaps 3, relating to the background. All property always has a value. If one purchases a property, you purchase it for a value, a purchase price. If it's donated to you, there's a value being attached to it. If there's an inheritance, there's a value being attached to it. There are things like transfer duties, donation tax, estate duties, capital gains tax, and all that, by the way, the state that wants to take it without compensation, if it comes to taxation, they accept market value. Market value is the basis for purposes of taxation. Then also, the municipalities in the Municipal Property Rates Act, Local Government Municipal Property Rates Act, they also go and they each and every property from border to border, or from wall to wall, is it more exact, actually goes and value properties. It's a rateable property in terms of the Act. The owner is liable. Even agricultural properties, since the new dispensation, which was not so in the past, those properties are all part of rateable properties valued. There's a valuation roll coming up. And if you don't object to the valuation roll, that valuation becomes cast in stone and is part of a formula to consider the rates payable. So rates is also a fact. So that is just as a background. Now, section 36, let us consider whether the state can satisfy the justification of a departure. Now, the only justification which I've seen was in one of the amicus curiae said something to the effect that there might be a slight difference in that a null compensation may fast-track land reform. But that is speculative. There's no substantiation. There are no facts placed before you to say that in fact it will fast-track. We cannot say so, we just can speculate. And who was the party that had to bring the justification and the reasonableness? Was the state. They had to come and tell that to this court. They didn't. Now, there is no evidence that the specific null compensation will make any material difference as far as land reform is concerned. And understand me, I am for land reform and I accept the history. But we want to know whether the null compensation is going to make a difference to the extent that we deviate from the clear words of this Constitution. The alleged slight difference.
Sorry, on that. It says that payment, compensation, the payment, the amount and manner must be just and equitable. Are we
Yes.
to assume that the manner of payment will always be monetary?
Yes.
So manner has then got a very limited, narrow meaning,
I would
as
say,
in a monetary value.
Judge Slingers, thank you for that question. I would say that it says that you can pay that in installments or you can pay it in a certain manner. I think that is what's meant with manner. But it still remains money. You're not going to pay him with golden coins or what are these things that you find on the computer these days. That you're going to pay them with money. State pays with that. So the alleged slight difference to be weighed against possible nominal values. We're talking about that. That was already a concession in the Constitution. It can be any nominal amount because of it. Why is that going to make a difference? As I've said, there's no evidence that the state's unable to pay compensation. But there's evidence, and that I've seen in AfriForum's papers, and I don't know whether it's really disputed, I didn't see any dispute, that the slow progress was as a result of corruption, administrative dysfunctionality, and administrative incapacity. That we've seen with the Restitution of Land Act. There's also no indication that other less restrictive measures will not work. For example, the Restitution of Land Rights Act, why doesn't it work? Why can't they prop it up and let it work, if that is the problem? So to resort to nil compensation as a solution is the wrong way to go. Now we compare that to the owner. That's the next point in this weighing exercise of reasonable and justifiable. It's a fundamental right that the owner stands to lose. It's a property that was acquired by way of cost, directly or indirectly. You don't get the property out of it unless someone donates it to you out of the sky. The payments having been made. These payments were even made after 1994 by people disadvantaged in the previous regime. So we have that type of situation. The people in Mpumalanga, where Spock actually comes from, they went ahead and bought properties all over the show. They bought properties in the outskirts of towns, they bought buildings. Are they now to stand their properties? And they've actually part of the previous disadvantaged group. And then, to pay no compensation while they're paying taxes, while they're paying rates, all based on the market value, that creates an anomaly. The state wants to take, but they forget how they take the money as far as taxes are concerned. And then why is the difference between the public purpose and the public interest? You've got a neighbor, his property is now being expropriated for public purpose and he gets some money there, and yours is now for public interest. There's an equality problem. Then also the bona fide purchaser. This person has bought bona fide in 1994. We're 30 years down the line since 1994. Under the impression that land not to be taken with compensation, hopeful to make a quick buck or money out of this proposition, everyone has to live, everyone has to earn their living. He's trying, or he or she trying their best, and now all of a sudden they stand to lose it because of a new act that comes in. That cannot be justifiable. They're losing their investment capital, expenses, taxes, being left with no replacement asset on their balance sheet. This affects the banks and the creditors. Even they had a property, there were loans granted to this individual person, all of a sudden the asset is gone. Now you have to say, look at my balance sheet, it's just disappeared in the mist. Why must the individual owner pay the brunt of land reform? Why must the individual person of, I think we're 70 million people or 65? Now individuals are singled out to carry the brunt of land reform, but land reform is necessary, but why one person getting nil? So it's creating a situation of abuse. Who are the owners? Who are we talking about? These owners can be trusts, can be companies with shares. It can be consisting of people previously disadvantaged, as I've already pointed out. It creates the possibility of abuse, and it will result in endless litigation that we have never seen before the courts. Everyone will be running to them. So that is as far as that is concerned. As far as the public, the society is concerned, that's the third tier of considering justifiable and reasonable. This act and legislation will shake off investors and damage the economy. No one will invest. They will shy away from a dispensation without compensation. With no compensation, properties can be taken. It will affect the banking and the security system. It will create uncertainty. Now that is the argument why we say it is not justifiable and reasonable in an open society that this relaxation of the Constitution occurs. And there's no factual substance to show otherwise. Judges, that takes me to the third page of the judgment. The third page of the judgment, even if no compensation is reasonable and justifiable, and this I present in a different way than what was said by the people before me. I say this is an alternative argument. In other words, if the court finds that no compensation should apply, then we can look at sections 12(3)(a) and 3(b), two sections that are picked. And we've done that in our heads to say that there's a problem with that. Now the problem is, perhaps it was conveyed to you, but not in the same terminology that I'm going to use. It's fettering the discretion. If one has a look at section 25(3), it says the 12(3) of the Act. Now, firstly, there are two discretions to be taken. The first discretion is 12(1). The amount of compensation, that's in line with the Constitution, must be just and equitable, reflecting an equitable balance between the public interest, the interest so and so that it carries on. And then it deals with the factors that was already stated in the Constitution. So the official, the first point that he will have to consider, or she, I'm just saying he for practical purposes, I don't want to prolong this argument, it says that the amount of compensation must be just. So that person will have to apply his or her mind to say the amount of compensation, so of what is just and equitable as a result regarding the amount. As the Act now stands, there's a second point. It may be just and equitable for nil compensation to be paid where land is expropriated in the public interest having regard to. So that's another, so there's twice that a discretion should be followed. It might even be as far as 25(3) a subjective discretion. The problem with which I have, or which we have together with my junior rather, is that A to D fetters the discretion. This official is now confronted with this discretion that has to be exercised, and he says, but it reads, if one reads the section, it says the following. I'm not going to be long with this, it has been debated.
Well, Mr. Stratham, is it a discretion or an objective assessment of the facts?
It's a discretion. It's a discretion that has been to be taken. Administrative, it's not really administrative because the court does, this Act doesn't allow for an administrative procedure. The pacha is not applicable, so it's a discretion. So
This Act?
Act doesn't allow for pacha.
Okay.
Because if one has a look at section 19, one will see there that the 19.6.
So what does the administrator do?
He administrates without pacha because pacha
He
has been
administrates
taken out
without
of the Act.
budget. Okay.
And there's also section 27 that's got an impact on this pacha argument. But if need be, I'll go there. But
Okay.
I don't know. I don't think it's really the crux of the case. But I'll briefly deal with that as well. The point is the following: having regard to all relevance, the may is being now promoted by the respondents as the be and all, may be just and equitable for nil compensation to be paid where land is expropriated in the public interest, having regard to all relevant circumstances, including, that including word is very prominent, including but not limited to. So these circumstances, including, are predefined circumstances. If one reads it together with the preamble of this Act, the preamble of this Act, if one pages to the front page, it says what it has to done, and then about the third line from the top, to identify certain instances where the provision of nil compensation may be just and equitable for expropriation in the public interest. So this is the aim that was set in the preamble of the Act at the top. or the introductory portion of the Act. So the administrator, his discretion is fettered. Now he sees that there are many administrators all along the country. They're not sitting in court, perhaps don't know exactly. They just be confronted with this Act, and they say including but not limited, and then those factors are set out. And then they say, but these are one of these circumstances that are included. And then they follow that because they say, Mr. X is ticking the box on paragraph A, and therefore we must take his land without compensation. So it's a total fettering of the discretion, and that is the problem. But if one analyzes these specific points, and we go to A, none of those are actually realistic as far as the facts are concerned. It leads this administrator up the wrong garden path, taking that person away from the true facts. So what is happening here is where the land is not being used and the owner's main purpose is not to develop land. Now, say for instance, let me just take an example. There are agricultural land plots, what we call outskirts of towns. Some people buy those agricultural holdings for purposes of holding it because they see that the town may develop in that direction, and then they can sell it as for a profit and they keep it. But they don't use it. There is no water on those plots. Some blue gum trees perhaps there, which we can see, especially there in the northern parts. And but there's no water, no electricity, nothing. It's barren land. No one can farm there because nothing is going on there. So those agricultural holdings are bought for purposes of development. But the person who buys it now is not a developer himself. Because to be a developer is not an easy job. You have to have capital. You have to be able to go through the zoning and the rezoning processes, the township development, all lots of money to be expended. But that person is not going to develop the land because he doesn't have the money. Now all of a sudden, because he falls into this category of not to develop the land, although he wanted to sell it to a developer, he's now in this category and he doesn't use it. Now all that he does is he goes and he builds a shack there for one of his personnel or someone that he knows, and then he says, oh no, we're using it. So it can be circumvented quite easy. And that's already happening. I don't want to testify. But the point is the following.
You under oath, Mr.
Yes. I'll go on the oath, but it still remain hearsay. The point is the following. That is, and then as was pointed out, the appreciation of the market value. By implication, that already accepts there's a value, because if there's nothing, how can it appreciate? So that doesn't work out. It's leading the decision maker up the wrong road. Then, as far as C is concerned, where the owner has abandoned the land. If land is abandoned, you can bring an application to court if you're the state. You can declare it bona vacantia. You can take it. It's already law in existence. It doesn't have to be. And then this decision maker must now decide on the subjective mind of the owner of the property, failing to exercise control, for instance. The owner can be incapacitated physically. He can be in a situation with no money. He don't have the means to do it, or whatever. There are different scenarios. Now all of a sudden, this administrator is now going to decide, oh, he can't control it. But there might be reasons. Now it places an onus on the owner to come forward to say, no, because of these specific sections, I've got to rebut. I have to tell that this is my intentions. And then the administrator can say, I don't believe you, really. Whatever. So this is opening up unfettered discretion and opening up abuse. And the question that we need to ask, why is it there? What purpose does it serve? It serves no purpose.
And that's why it's an objective assessment.
Yeah, but all this...
So we're not interested in your subjective
all
views.
this...
The facts will speak for themselves.
What facts? Must the owner now come and present bring his attorney and present facts?
Maybe-
Does he have an onus?
If he wants to bring his attorney, he's welcome to do so, but all he has to provide facts to show that he still has control over the property.
Yeah. This is not, this will just be further litigation. Now the last point, this is now the last point that I'm going to deal with.
The last page of your judgment.
Yeah, I think it's the third one. I've made the judgment a bit shorter. So if one goes and look at, I just want to point out the problems that we have with the Act. This Act is written for purposes of compensation. It's written for purposes of amounts to be paid. And I just want to point out the sections, and I would like to do that to the assistants to the court, and I'm not going to be long. Now, there are about 10 sections which I quickly want to refer to, because that will show that section 12.3 is an exception on the Act. It's a sort of an afterthought that came in, but it doesn't fit into the content of the Act. And we don't have to interpret the Act. That's not our purpose. We have to interpret the Constitution. But that is page 1. We passed that now. So if one has a look at 5.1c of the Act, I don't know whether you have the Act there before you.
We do. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Saldana. 5.1c says the following. The expropriating authority must consider all, everyone on this page, must consider all relevant circumstances when deciding whether to expropriate property and must ascertain C. Facts relevant to calculating an amount of compensation, we all know what compensation means, that accords with Section 12 and formulate an offer of just and equitable compensation. If you come with an offer and say, I'm not paying anything, that's no offer. I'll say, go home. I don't want an offer of compensation. For each person would be affected if the property were expropriated. And then also I can just brush on that. There's also a valuer that needs to be appointed and a whole process that has to be followed. Section 7.2k. Section 7.2, notice of intention to expropriate must include, and I'm going to K, an offer of compensation which the expropriating authority considers just and equitable, and an explanation of how the amount was arrived at with reference to supporting information. If we are right in our submission that amount means money, then the amount must, how the amount was arrived, klink in the mint as they say, was arrived at with reference to supporting. So if I null, how can I offer an amount? It doesn't work out as far as this Act is concerned. So as paragraph 7.6a, the expropriation authority may decide to expropriate the property after the compensation, the amount of which and the time and manner of payment of which have been agreed with the owner, etc., etc. So that is, all these sections are written on the premises of compensation, payment, and amount in terms of the Constitution. It's actually a good piece of legislation, apart from a few sections which causes problems. Now, a notice of expropriation, page section 8G, 83G. It's a notice of expropriation must contain, subject to section 20, the amount of compensation agreed upon or approved or decided by a court. So if the offer comes and they don't agree on it, it has to go to court, but it goes to court in terms of section 19.1. I'll get to that soon. And the notice of paragraph 4A, the date and dates on which the expropriating authority proposes to pay the compensation and any interest payable. How do you pay interest on zero? That can't be. In respect thereof, in terms of section 13. D, on the next page, an explanation of how the amount of compensation was arrived at, together with supporting documents. Now, 15.1. I just want to stand still at section 12.5. It's also relevant. The property, section 12.5. If the property is land, the expropriating authority must consider the amount of outstanding municipal property rates, taxes, levies, and charges relating to the property when making the offer or just or equitable consideration. So what the legislature there wants to achieve is the legislature accepts that in terms of the MPRA, the owner is, by way of a statute, liable. Is an original power in terms of section 229 of the Constitution, and is liable to pay the rates. So if you pay compensation, it must make provisions for the rates. What is a bit unfair, and I would say contrary to the principles of equality, but it's not part of the disputes today, is to pay the person if it's outstanding, but the one that's paid his account, he doesn't get anything of these rates. But be that as it may, that's a fight for another day. But the point is they acknowledge, and where there's such amounts, compensation will cover that. You cannot pay zero because then it doesn't make sense that the outstanding municipality rates be paid, and rates are calculated on value. Then payment of compensation, this is a bigger one, section 15, 15.1. Subject to section 16, 17, and 18, an expropriated owner or expropriate holder of a right is entitled to payment of compensation on the date and in the manner as agreed by the parties or as decided by or approved by the court. Now, even if we interpret this act separately in terms of the Natal Joint Pension Fund and the other principles, UJ cases and all that, one will find that compensation means money. That's what it is. So there's a payment of compensation. Paragraph section 17 of this act. Payment of municipal property rates, taxes, and other charges out of the compensation money. 17.1. The expropriating authority must pay outstanding municipal rates, taxes, levies, and other charges out of the compensation money. So compensation in that sense talks about money. The expropriating, then 3, the expropriating authority, but then it goes on. There's a mechanism being created in section 17 for the payment of the rates. But there's also, in terms of 17.3b, there's also a situation that there can be a payment on behalf of. But the mere using of the word behalf of means it remains the liability of the owner. The owner is in law liable for rates. So that is all dealt with in that section. I don't have to deal with it because it's not a point of dispute. The only reason why I'm referring to it is because it indicates the importance of it being paid. What is interesting is section 18, and that gives an answer to lots of questions that were asked. Deposit of compensation money with the master. The expropriating authority must deposit the amount of compensation payable in terms of this act with the master, after which the expropriation authority ceases to be liable. So under circumstances, even if the person cannot be found or is gone or whatever, and they get to an amount, they pay it in with the master as security for that expropriation of the property. If a property expropriated under this act was left in terms of a will or testament to an undetermined beneficiary or beneficiaries, that was the old bona vacantia type of situation. If compensation is payable in terms of the act to a person whose address is not readily ascertainable or who, unless otherwise agreed, fails to supply the prescribed information, then they pay it in with the master. If compensation is payable and the expropriating authority, after reasonable endeavours, is unable to determine to whom it must be paid. So money needs to be paid if one reads the whole act in context. The only point that militates is section 12.3. Now, if we go to section 19, that's also a very interesting one, and that's the second one from last, if you allow me. Section 19 says, mediation and determination by court. If the expropriating authority and disputing party do not agree on the amount, time and manner of payment of compensation. They may attempt to settle the dispute by mediation, and then it goes on. And that was the one, the 19.2, which is a problem because it should be actually intention to expropriate. I think that's the meaning, which was Mr. Havenga also addressed you on that. But be that as it may, if there is a dispute, if the state comes and says zero, no compensation, the owner cannot come in terms of Section 19.1 because it doesn't apply to that scenario. It applies to a scenario if the disputing party do not agree on the amount. Zero is not an amount. Time and manner of payment of compensation. So that leaves that owner without Section 19.1 to go to court to assess the amount, because this is written on the basis of compensation to be paid. And that is why I say 12.3 does not fit into the picture. It's not written for that purpose. I must say, in all fairness, Section 19.6 has got a wider type of approach to the court. Subsection 2 does not preclude a person from approaching a court on any manner relating to the application of the Act. So you can still go with that, and I need to point that out to you as well. So as far as Section 20 is concerned, it also deals with the urgent expropriation, but it says in 25, if not already done in terms of 7.2k, expropriating authority must make a written offer of compensation to the expropriated owner or expropriated holder of a right of such reason possible, and then there must be an offer of money to be made, and payment must be made as soon as reasonable possible. Why do they say payment should be made as reasonable possible if it's zero? It doesn't fit in. So then we have briefly in our heads referred to Section 27. I don't want to waste the court's time, but 27 creates for us a problem, but we're not a party to this litigation, but we can just point out that what it says is the following, and it should be taken into consideration in looking at the actions of the administrator. 72 says, the failure to take any steps in terms of this Act as a prerequisite for any decision or action does not invalidate the decision or action if the failure is not material, does not prejudice any person, and is not procedurally unfair. So this administrator can decide, oh no, this is not material, it is valid. So it's not for the court to decide it, that is now for the official to decide. That's the problem, and I'm leaving it at that. Under the circumstances, Judge, I'm an amicus curiae. I pointed out these points to you. I'm not going to take up any time. But there's one request that I have. The request is that my junior and I are here pro bono, and we seeking leave. We're not going to reply to anyone, and we're seeking leave that we be excused from further procedures because we've got a compensation problem ourselves. So we cannot be here for zero compensation.
So you're seeking to abandon us.
We're abandoning you. You've got your remedies, but we're abandoning you. If you will, Judge, if you will allow us to excuse
Certainly.
ourselves. Thank you.
So,
Thank you very much.
Mr. Strydom, is it Mr. Miller? No? Am I getting the names wrong?
It's Mr. Oppenheimer that's going to be next.
No.
And
Your colleague,
Mr. Slobbert.
Mr. Slubbard.
Thank you.
Mr. Strydom, thank you very much for your assistance to the court. And we understand that you need to leave us. But thank you for being here for the past 2 days. And travel well. And we'll see you sometime
Thank you, Judge.
in
Appreciate it.
the northern provinces, they say.
Yes.
Good.
Thank you.